woods today, you're sure of a big surprise. If you go down in the woods today.
Butterfly conservation volunteers have been holding work parties for pearl-bordered Fritillary habitat management in the woodlands belonging to the Bathurst estate near Cirencester for 10 years now. Butterfly numbers have fluctuated, and there were times when we thought we were losing them for good. Whilst many counties have lost this iconic butterfly, it is currently doing well here in Gloucestershire. Bathurst estate forestry staff 50 years ago. For many men, working on the estate was a job for life. I remember 1968. The beetles were top of the pops. I was doing O-levels, and boys had replaced butterflies and moths as my main interest in life. Frightening to think that in my lifetime numbers of pearl-bordered Fritillaries have declined by 60 to 70%. Fast forward 34 years from the previous photo, and forestry staff have dwindled too. 6 men working on 3,500 acres of woodland, and prizes are still being won for good management of the woods. 3 men on this photo are still employed by the estate in 2020, but a lot of forestry work is done by contractors, and a quiet job for life working out in the woods is no longer an option. There is still a place for a man and his tractor. In fact, Ray did some work on one of the PBF compartments in the spring with a tractor and swipe. But this machine is capable of rapidly clearing acres of plantation very quickly. The front grabber can saw through, strip the branches off, and chop the trunk into neat sections ready for stacking in minutes. It can do the work in a fraction of the time it would take men in the 1960s and before. Large machinery does not necessarily deal with all the problems associated with growing timber. Men used to be employed to clean compartments, brushing and clearing excess growth away from the newly planted trees, so that the young trees had space and light to grow tall and straight. The current policy of continuous cover forestry allows for natural regeneration of seedlings such as silver birch and hazel alongside the planted trees, and leaves bramble and everything else growing on the woodland floor to act as a nursery crop. This diversity benefits birds, beetles and shade-loving creatures, as well as saving considerable costs and staffing, but spells disaster for the pearl-bordered Fritillary, which needs violets as its larval food plant, and open sunny clearings where bugle, the nectar plant, can grow. Around 2014, when this distribution map was published, we were quite convinced that we would lose pearl-bordered Fritillaries from Gloucestershire. Numbers were at an all-time low following some mild winters and wet springs. The butterfly had disappeared from most of eastern England, with hotspots concentrated in Devon, Cornwall, Hampshire, Wales and Scotland. Personally, I think the outlook for this butterfly is better now than in 2014, thanks to some good weather during the flight seasons all over the country, and crucially dry weather in the months before the flight period. There have been some good numbers in the last few years. Violets can survive for some time under bracken and bramble, and pearl-bordered Fritillaries are found in compartments long after they look suitable, if they can still find violets on which to lay their eggs. Many hands make light work, as they say, and clearing all the excess vegetation around the planted crop of trees does not harm them in any way, so our volunteer work is encouraged by the estate. Our work parties originally started in Hayley Wood, which was for many years a stronghold after the felling of a plantation of Scots pine in 2000. A gentle south-facing slope with lots of violets was a perfectly viable habitat, with some help for volunteers, for 15 years, until the planted crop of mainly larch took over and shaded the entire patch. We had a surprising ally in the form of the local population of hares, which nibbled off the tops of the trees planted without guards, leaving stunted plants and lots of replanting to be done. Working in the nearby forestry office, I could spend my lunch hours sat amongst the pearl-bordered Fritillaries, and I don't know who was more surprised, the hare or me, when we came face to face one lunchtime. Due to poor growth and stunted trees, open sunny clearings were maintained for many more years than they would normally have been. One of our first picnic lunches in winter 2009, the barbecue was a bit of a treat. But bearing in mind the compartment had now been planted for 9 years, and the average useful lifespan of pearl-bordered Fritillaries of a new plantation is 4 to 5 years, numbers of Fritillaries were dwindling, and silver birch was encroaching over the remaining patches of suitable habitat. Grass was starting to cover the open, sunny areas, and brambles and bracken were increasing. The forest manager with whom I worked gave permission for BC volunteers to carry out some work parties over the winter of 2009-2010. Most people here are still volunteers, either on the estate or BC reserves. We can still guarantee a job for life. The two Sues, of course, Branch Chair Sue Smith and Sue Dodd. Peter Hugo, a keen volunteer with an ulterior motive. The estate also holds important populations of rare moths. Peter holds annual moth trapping events in the woods to look for the plumed prominent, whose food plant is field maple. The drab looper is found in similar habitat to Pearl-bordered Fritillaries and flies at about the same time. The food plant is wood spurge, again a rare moth with UK bat species status. Some rare micro moths with unpronounceable names are also found. There's nothing like getting the new year off to a good start, and for several years we held our work parties on New Year's Day. It must be good for you. 10 years later and all these people are still active volunteers. They haven't changed a bit. Still concentrating on Haley Wood, in January 2011, a hibernating brimstone was the first butterfly species of the year. 2011 was an excellent year for pearl-bordered fritillaries. They were found all over the three estate woods, Haley Wood, Oakley Wood and Overley Wood. They have now sadly disappeared from Haley Wood and are struggling in Overley Wood, but continue to do well in Oakley Wood. Work parties would not be possible without John Coates, who unfailingly attends every work party with a van full of tools, brush cutters, a bramble mower, chainsaws. He's a star. Keith Mills, Forest Manager, and Matthew Oates, former Nature Conservation Advisor for the National Trust. Matthew has been studying and recording pearl-bordered fritillaries on the Bathurst estate for nearly 30 years and now advises us on work parties. Here's Matthew raking cut bracken over exposed violets to protect hibernating caterpillars. Mark Taylor introduced us to the marvellous bramble-munching mower, which saved a great deal of hand cutting, until the machine was unfortunately stolen. Another work party, another picnic. We were still working in Haley Wood in 2014. Pearl-bordered fritillaries probably abandoned this compartment in 2016, as it became too shady and overgrown. Vic and John in Overley Wood. We started diversifying from Haley Wood in 2014, and work parties began in the south of Overley Wood and north section of Oakley Wood, the main woodland. We chose to work in the compartments where pearl-bordered fritillaries were recorded, as that was where the violets were. There were no more clear-felled compartments for them to move into, so we had to improve those they were using already. Oakley Wood, compartment 58, now the best compartment for pearl-bordered fritillary numbers, needed a lot of work. We chose to work there because we saw pearl-bordered fritillaries were still finding violets despite the high bracken, bramble and silver birch. A motorcycle track through the middle of the compartment allowed easy access for volunteers, and it was not too far to walk from the car park. Here's Mo helping with a very tidy dead hedge. We held 2 work parties each winter here over 3 winters, gradually increasing clear areas, and then in February 2019, the estate forestry team sprayed an approved herbicide to suppress the grass. During the flight season, numbers exploded. Helped by good spring weather, they spread out all over Oakley Wood, and some were recorded in Sickridge Wood and Dameway Banks for the first time in 20 years. Sadly, the estate has a lot of ash dieback, but for the butterflies this opened up new sunny clearings and they quickly colonised them. Looking back at some before and after photos, there used to be a very strong colony in Botany Bay in Overley Wood. This was 2005, not too long after planting an adjoining compartment. We had high hopes that large numbers would move in, but this was quickly taken over by bracken and bramble. 10 years later, trees appearing over the tree guards, pearl-bordered fritillaries were struggling to find violets on which to lay eggs. We did some work here that winter, but they have been decreasing slowly, and only single figures were recorded in 2020. We think this was the last season here. Another successful compartment soon after planting up with mainly sycamore. Normal growth between the trees left pearl-bordered fritillaries struggling to locate violets, but still determined to stay in that compartment. Another year, another picnic. We held several work parties in compartment 56 before the estate forestry team took it on in spring 2020. We received a Caring for the Cotswolds grant from the Cotswold Conservation Board in the autumn of 2018 and were able to pay the forestry team to send in a tractor and swipe, and the team also removed lower branches from all the planted trees. They also sprayed herbicide in the grassy areas. Although pearl-bordered fritillary numbers were lower than expected in 2020, the herbicide had started to take effect and lots of egg laying was noted towards the end of the flight period. High hopes then for next year. In 2018, students from the Royal Agricultural University, under the leadership of lecturer and VC member Dr. Ian Grange, undertook some clearing work in Overley Wood as part of their coursework. They needed extra sustenance to keep them going. How appropriate to have butterfly cakes. They look delicious. Sorry, team, I'm not good at making cakes. Thanks to the grant, we were able to purchase 500 violets, and under Matthew's guidance, the RAU students planted them under bracken along the Overley Ride. 200 more violets were supplied by John Coates, so 700 planted in total. These would form part of an ongoing study as part of their course, checking establishment of plants and feeding damage by caterpillars. In another part of Oakley Wood, Julian Bendel, project officer from the Back from the Brink initiative, brought in a party of Cotswold wardens for 2 work parties. They opened up another part of an existing clearing by cutting hazel and stacking it neatly for collection by the side of the ride. We were delighted to meet Jack and his dad Rene at our work party in Overley Wood at the beginning of January 2020. Jack worked tirelessly all day felling hazel and silver birch and stacking it into a neat dead hedge. We made good progress in a neglected part of the wood, where I had found a small colony of Pearl-bordered Fritillaries in 2019. It was still there in 2020, and more small colonies were found on the eastern edge of Overley Wood. I was so inspired by Jack's enthusiasm that I organised another work party at the end of January. This time we were joined by some good friends, regulars to our work parties, from Wiltshire branch, whose day was made before they even started work by the sighting of a great grey shrike just down the road from where we parked. Good progress was achieved in a short time before the rain came on. It was in this newly cleared area that I saw the first of the 2020 Pearl-bordered Fritillaries. The grant received from the Cotswold Conservation Board enabled us to buy and install an interpretation sign, the first of its kind anywhere on the Bathurst estate. This is right on the edge of the main compartment, so if you are planning to go next year, first find the sign and then find your way into the compartment behind it. Pearl-bordered Fritillaries, like all butterflies, are very weather dependent. The last couple of years have been perfect with dry and sunny weather during the flight season, and this has undoubtedly been the main factor in the increase in numbers and local distribution. They are currently thriving in Gloucestershire, and we hope that by opening up clearings for them, we have made a difference.